The expressed views, statements, and opinions by the guests on the Risk Advisor program made either during the show or on the corresponding social media and blog outlets are not necessarily the view or opinions of Baxter Productions, Inc. or any of its affiliates, associates, or others who are part of this production. Information provided during this broadcast is for news purposes only and does not constitute a remedy for any of the discussed risks presented.
Did you ever wonder how much simpler life was when we were growing up? Today, there are growing concerns about the impact of digital technologies on children's emotional well-being. The best results of social media misuse, anxiety, depression, and suicide. How bad is it, and what should you be considering? We're going to talk about that today on theriskadvisor.com.
The Risk Advisor. You're listening to the Risk Advisor Vodcast. The Risk Advisor highlights topics about the most important personal security and safety issues today. This is for you, your family, and your loved ones. Experts alert to trends, tactics, and techniques used against us. You can be more aware and more informed to stay safe in this ever-changing, complicated place we call life. And now your host, media's go-to guy, Sal LaFriere.
Welcome to the riskadvisor.com vodcast. We're here with Jennifer Desai, a child psychologist and director of special services in the New Jersey school system with over 20 years of experience in the field. Today, we're going to talk about parents' concerns over social media. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sal. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, sure you are. It's a great way to spend the day. So, Jen, let's get into it sort of quick. The story with schools and how things have changed. Obviously, when we went to grammar school to the point of things today, how's things changed?
Well, today there's a lot more technology involved in schools. And with that comes a lot of other problems and issues from the impact of social media and gaming and videos. This has led to a significant increase in students demonstrating depression, anxiety, even suicidal ideation. And it's become the major part of what I do in my work in schools now.
So on a daily basis, and when we were kids growing up, suicide happened maybe once every 8 years. What's the big challenge you see every day?
We are almost weekly sending kids out for anxiety, depression, or suicide ideation. So this has become commonplace now in the schools. It wasn't when we went to school, but it is now. And social media, for what we're seeing, is at the crux of it. That seems to be one of the major triggers in children today having depression, anxiety.
So let's look at this just in a little bit of a historical perspective. Right? When we were kids growing up, and you had horror movies, and some of us hated to watch them. I still to this day hate to watch them. But you would watch horror movie and have nightmares.
Yes.
Today we have social media. Correlation between the two?
So it's in a way it's very similar because it's a traumatic experience that a child has from either watching a video or a movie. That was back in our day. Now it's become viewing a post that has an impact on them. It can be downloading something on YouTube that they have never seen before. I mean, all kinds of rather gruesome things are available on YouTube nowadays.
And not only that, but the gaming industry is the same thing, correct?
Yes, the gaming industry can be very upsetting for kids. It's got a lot of rather violent images in them.
Speaking of images, women, young girls growing up today have used in the past would have the issue of in magazines they always had the perfect bodies, the perfect hair, the perfect skin tones. Are we seeing just an evolution of that today with the kids? How is social media affecting young women?
Well, now it's even more prevalent because now it's not just the movie star on the screen. It's really also the child next door who has the perfect Snapchat video, or or post, or selfie, or things like that. And so now you're not just living up to an ideal that's put out in a magazine and it's a model or a actress. Now you're dealing with people who that's what they do for a living, and they're regular people, the person next door. And now you have to live up to that. You have to take the perfect selfie. You have to take the perfect video and get as many likes as possible. So it's become more prevalent, more difficult for teenagers to live up to that ideal.
So in some ways, it's social media and television are having, a similar effect. Do you think social media is worse than ever than what we would face with television?
Absolutely, because we only had a few channels when we grew up.
Three, I think. Wait,
Three.
It was three, right? It was three.
Oh, PBS, you had four.
Oh, four PBS. Right? You had CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS, and I think there was
Like a channel 9 or 11.
9 of them, like the local,
The local one.
local stations.
Your local stations. But now there's endless ways that you can get information. The internet is wide open. There's constantly platforms and different media streaming ways to view anything, and anyone can post anything. There's really no limit, and someone will be a platform for you to put something out there. So, back to the point of there's endless images that a child can see, and endless hours they can watch these types of streaming.
Now, obviously, we're talking about children and the effects of social media on children and,
Yes.
and the problems with it. But let's talk about the adults for a second. Is there a difference, or are the adults facing the same problems?
Well, for adults, it's a little bit different because we're a little less susceptible to the addictive qualities of it. But you can use social media, Facebook things, to reach out and connect with family and friends, and that's a positive. But when you use it to avoid contact with people, that's when it becomes a problem, and that's when it leads to depression and anxiety.
Can it ever be used on the children's side of it? Can it ever, or young adults or adolescents, can it ever be used for a positive side?
So there is a positive side. There are forums, there are help networks for students who are experiencing certain problems, and they can connect with other kids having the same issues. So they don't feel alone, that they're the only ones who have those issues. But it's used less. That part of it is used less, and so it doesn't have the positive effect that you'd want it to.
We were talking in pre-production about, if you took a bunch of 14-year-old girls and you put them in a room and they
Yes.
would wind up texting each other rather than talk to each other.
Absolutely. They will sit, if you watch a group of teenagers, they will text the person sitting next to them rather than talk to them. And this is a big problem because in order to be a social animal, you have to connect with other people. And that connection is important to your well-being. It actually helps you produce happy hormones that make you happy connecting with people. You don't get that when you connect with people only using technology.
And the problem is when you're reading a text, how many times did you get a text and you don't know if it's sarcastic or if it's being, just a regular statement?
Absolutely. Many workplace issues and many issues between kids happen because you cannot read tone or things into a text or an email. So you think maybe the person's yelling at you because they're using all caps when really their cap lock got on by mistake and they didn't realize it. So that becomes an issue.
Okay, we're going to take a real quick break. When we come back, we want to talk about the potential psychological disorders that come from the misuse of social media, and we'll talk to Jen more about those topics in about a minute. Be right back.
Sir, the chairman of the board is on the phone.
Let me ask you something. Workplace violence, terrorism, identity theft, cyberbullying, and stalking. It's not a matter of if they will happen, it's a matter of when. Are you prepared? Are you ready? Can you tell the board of directors you did all you could? The security world is too complicated to do it alone. You need a security advisor, someone you trust, to get straight answers, to tell you what you need to hear, not want to hear. Call Protective Countermeasures now. Protective Countermeasures has been providing security consulting to Fortune 500 companies for nearly 20 years. Make the call. The call is confidential. This is one secret you can keep. Call today, 914-576-8706, or visit us at protectivecountermeasures.com.
You're watching the Risk Advisor podcast, and we're here with Jennifer Desai, a child psychologist and director of specialized services for the New Jersey school system with over 20 years of experience in the field. Today we want to talk about parents' concerns over social media. So let's talk about psychological disorders a little bit, and how big of a problem is it, and what exactly are they?
So anxiety and depression are kind of commingled here, and that's huge. Social anxiety disorder is becoming a big problem, and that is when you become unable to socially interact with peers, adults, any other people in a social situation. So it causes anxiety, it causes depression to do so, and you will avoid it at any cost.
And it also gives the opportunity for, aside from all of that, substance abuse issues. Does that jump into this at all?
Yes, that can also become part of it, because in order to alleviate the anxiety or the depression, kids can start to use other methods that are not approved.
It's sort of funny because we keep talking about this vicious circle that the kids get into. Yes. Where they become anxious. It's difficult for me to understand about anxiety with the children. I mean, when I went to grammar school, the biggest anxiety I had was my mother running after me with a wooden spoon. So to understand the fact that that children are going through this is tough for someone like us to understand. Explain a little bit about the anxiety that kids go through and how that's affecting in school.
So what happens is students become anxious because they cannot have access to their social media. They can't have access to their phones, to their IM, to the Snapchat, to know what's going on. They have to know what's going on. It's a phenomenon that's gotten a nickname called FOMO, fear of
missing out.
Missing out. Exactly. So if they're not connected 24/7, they're missing out on something. So that's where the anxiety comes from. The depression comes from not being able to access it, or finding out that you have missed out on something, becomes the depression. And then it just keeps building on itself. It keeps getting worse because you're not connected, you're not involved, and then you start to get into social anxiety because now you don't want to interact because you're afraid of how that's going to be perceived and not perceived in a good light. So it becomes a vicious cycle of getting worse and worse and worse. It's a spiral. It's not really a circle. It's more of a spiral that goes downward.
So with all of the bad that's happening and going on, is social media really making us social misfits?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just a poor term, right? Yes. It's going to be, it's social media to get you out, get you to talk to people, getting to everybody and having a lot more friends. And yet there seems to be this wall that prevents it.
People are becoming more comfortable with talking to each other via text message, email, Facebook, IM, Snapchat, but not really having a conversation. If you think about Instagram and Snapchat, it's just a picture. You're not really having a communication. You're sending them a picture. So you're not talking to people. You're not interacting. You're not having a social conversation. You're not having to problem solve with people. If a child, all they do is have interactions in these quick little snippets, they're not having to problem solve. They're not having to say, hey, this person's saying something I'm not comfortable with, so I need to deal with it right now. So all that social skills that you would have in talking to people, that's no longer a part of the conversation. The give and take of a conversation, just like we're doing now, is not part of something that they're learning to do and do consistently.
I don't think we could actually have a conversation about social media without talking about, and talking about the bad sides of it, without talking about cyberbullying and
Yes.
the effects that that's having on the adolescents. And we see it in our practice here. We wind up seeing it even with adults, in
Yes.
with regards to stalking and some of the bullying that takes place. But that's separate. Keeping it back to the kids, talk to us about cyberbullying and the effects that it has on them.
Cyberbullying is absolutely devastating to adolescents. It occurs more with girls than boys. As I've said before, it's one of those things. You hand a boy a cell phone, they're going to look for a game. You hand a girl a cell phone, they're going to go on social media and they're going to tear each other apart. They leave each other out. They criticize each other. And that's devastating. It's especially bad in the middle school ages. That's when they're most critical of each other. And you get gang mentality and things like that, where they'll gang up on one girl. You see our suicide rates for middle schoolers increasing because of this. Severe depression, severe anxiety, suicidal ideation. So they're thinking about it. They may not act on it, but they're thinking about it. And cyberbullying is so much easier when you don't have to walk up to somebody and say, I don't like you, and I don't like you because. But you can say whatever you want behind that shield of anonymity when you're using social media.
There was a stat that came out by the Department of Justice in dealing with stalking, and they were talking about cyber, and they included cyberbullying statistics in it, and they said that on average, a cyberbullier at the adult stage winds up bullying 6 to 9 people at a time.
Yes.
Right? Where years ago when we were growing up, if you were going to be the bully, you could only bully 1 or 2 people at a time. You can only beat up so many people at a time. But
Yes.
now you got this problem where they can do it with this anonymity to it.
Mm-hmm.
With respect to the suicide ideation, is that something that? How do you make the determination or difference between something that's a cry for help and something that they really are thinking about?
Well, there's actual surveys that we utilize. The biggest one that's used universally is from the University of Columbia. Most schools have been trained to use it. We in our school have been trained to use it. And it helps you differentiate between, is it just something that they're thinking about, or is it something that they've really made a plan? So if your child has a plan in place, if they've written it down somewhere or communicated it to someone, then you need to seek help immediately. If it's just a thought that they're having, they're thinking about it, and would it be a good idea, not a good idea, they're still mulling that part of it, then you still need to seek help, but it's not as immediate. Most of the time we find out in the schools because kids are willing to tell us. They'll tell that their friend is starting to say things that they're uncomfortable with. We do have a level of access to a lot of these media outlets, so we see a lot of it before it happens. So we're able to try to find out, assess it, and then communicate that with the parents so that we can try to help them get to the problem as quickly as possible.
And parents obviously have to be sort of aware and engaged in it. And how big of a problem within 30 seconds, how big of a problem do you see where parents are either not engaged or just not talking to the children?
Well, like we said before, it's just as much of a problem with parents because they're on their own devices. They're having their own issues with social media, and they're not always paying attention to what's going on with their child. If your child is seeming to be withdrawn and not wanting to go out and hang out with their friends and do things and leave their room or leave their device behind, that's some warning signs that your child may be having problems with social media.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Jennifer Desai again about what to be on the lookout for and what you can do as a parent or as a guardian to help that child. We'll be right back.
From the files of New York detective Frank Santasola comes a riveting murder mystery novel, The Garbage Murders. After an illicit liaison with his mistress, the owner of a private sanitation company in New York is murdered. His wife, aware of the affair, first believes it could be the motivation for the killing. But when her truck drivers are attacked by her husband's associates, family values get questioned. Enter the life of Detective Frank Miranda, one of a few men in law enforcement assigned to infiltrate the Italian mob and bring to justice some of the biggest names in organized crime history. Be taken into the world of an infiltrator and the personal decisions and sacrifices he made daily. Guaranteed to touch all your emotions: sadness, anger, love, and laughter. Available on Amazon Books in both paperback and Kindle editions.
TheGarbageMurders.com.
You're watching the Risk Advisor Vodcast, and we're here with Jen Desai, a child psychologist and practitioner, talking about social media and its effects on children and what parents should be on the lookout for. So, Jen, we talked about suicide ideation. We talked about a lot of different things and a lot of different problems that children could wind up coming into. What are some of the things that parents can actually start to do? And I guess the first thing would be recognition or maybe talking to the child.
Yes, you need to have open conversation with your child. You need to be aware of what they are doing, what they're thinking, what's going on with them in social media, what's going on in their daily lives. There are a lot of apps out there that can help you monitor their social media. So you are aware of what they're saying, what's being said to them, who's on their social media is also very important to monitor as well.
So I guess knowing your child probably is one of the most important things, and understanding
Absolutely.
if the child is overly self-conscious. Is that a warning sign or something that you should be aware of?
Yes, if the child is overly self-conscious, if they're avoiding social situations, you want to start to have conversations with them about what's going on with them. If you're seeing them being alone, looking depressed, all these things are warning signs that there's something going on underlying, there's an issue and you want to address it.
Parents inevitably wind up saying, when they realize there's a problem, that's it, cut off. Right? You go to your room and, no TV, right? In our day, that was it, right? No phone, no TV. But today, they're cutting them off totally. Is that something that is a recommended step?
That's actually can make things worse because it can make the anxiety worse. If you make the anxiety worse, you make the depression worse. So if they're already having a fear of missing out, if they're already having anxiety about what's being posted and what's not being posted and making sure that they're posting things, then taking it all away from them is going to actually make the problem worse. Having discussions about what's appropriate, maybe bringing them down to one social media outlet versus having 5 or 6 or 7, that may help more than taking everything away from them.
So we talk about encouraging self-care, something that maybe you're going to recommend that the child take a little bit of time off from social media if they saw something that bummed them out or something along those lines. What about that as an effective technique?
That's very effective because that gives them a coping skill. It teaches them how to cope with difficult situations, and it gives them an outlet for their energy and encourages more social communication. In other words, have them involved in a sport or an activity or some type of hobby where they're out and about with people. Even just getting them out of the house and going for a walk is something that's very helpful. Fresh air and exercise is always a good thing.
But Mom used to say, go out and play.
Exactly. Go out and play. Go do something and get away from the social media and from the videos and from the gaming so that you have other things that occupy your life.
One of the most fascinating stats in doing the research for the show that I looked at that just blew me away was the amount of time that the kids are on social media. Talk about the studies.
So the studies have found that on average, teenagers are on social media 9 hours a day. And what they call tweeners, which is your 7-8-year-old to about 12-year-old, are on an average of 6 hours a day. So think about that. Let's talk through this number-wise. 9 hours a day on social media, 7 hours a day minimum in school. What's left to sleep? There's only 24 hours in a day.
And we're not even talking homework.
No, we're not. We've already used up 18. So now you have a pattern that you will lack sleep. You're already anxious about your social media. And we all know from research, from years and years of research, that sleep deprivation causes depression. So now you don't have sleep, you're already anxious, and now you're depressed. And when you're depressed, you don't sleep. So now you're sleeping even less because you're depressed. So now you've got this vicious cycle that keeps going around and round on itself. And eventually, lack of sleep causes you to have suicidal thoughts. And you may act on them because you are so severely depressed.
Kids today, and I guess maybe they're faced with a few more things than we had to when we were growing up. And I think an element of divorce, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I remember in one of the conversations we'd had, we were talking about how the kids have to face, they're facing poverty. The kids are dealing with the same thing that the adults are, right? So they're dealing with the poverty. They're dealing with the death of a loved one. They're dealing with the death of a good family member, maybe a grandmother or a close aunt or an uncle or something like that. And then you top all of this on it. How do they actually get through it?
I don't know.
What makes them adjust to it? How do they get to adjust?
Well,
does it form strong family support, or
yes.
do they get that from school? Or I could believe that a ton of kids are going to counselors.
So there are a lot of kids that are going to counselors, and there are a lot of kids that have other outlets. If your child is a healthy child, they have another outlet, whether it's drama or sports or a club that they're really active in, a hobby, something that they're doing with other people, and they get away from the pressures. The pressures are school related, they're family related, and they're social media related. So if they have some sort of outlet where they're getting away and they're doing other things. We all know, and there's tons of studies about sports being so good for you and building confidence and things like that. The same thing happens if you do drama. If you're out doing social programs, you're out helping homeless, you're doing food banks, you're doing those kinds of things, which is all the clubs are involved with. That again gives you a self-confidence and a social well-being that can counteract the things that are happening on social media.
So not necessarily in priority order, but first places parents should go as soon as they recognize something may be wrong.
You can always go to your pediatrician, who can give you advice and help you look at the child. They've known the child hopefully for a long time. You can go to your schools. We all have tons of resources. And then online, there's places like the Child Mind Institute where there's a lot of information available. So there's a lot of outlets for you to get assistance and to get the help you need for your child.
Great. Well, Jen, thank you for coming in. We really appreciate it. We want to say thank you again to our special guest, Jennifer Desai, and would like to remind you that if you have a question or comment, please write to us at questions@theriskadvisor.com. You could also follow us on our social media accounts, and you can find all of those links on our website at theriskadvisor.com. We hope you enjoyed this show, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks for watching.
We hope you enjoyed this show. If you have any questions, would like to appear on the program, or recommend a guest, contact us at theriskadvisor.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. View and listen to us on iTunes, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Roku TV. Tune in live on various local radio stations. Find links to all of these and listen to past shows at theriskadvisor.com. Thank you for listening, stay safe, and join us again next week for another episode of The Risk Advisor. Protective Countermeasures has been providing security consulting to Fortune 500 companies for nearly 20 years. Call today, 914-576-8706, protectivecountermeasures.com.
theriskadvisor.com.